Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the Lost Years of Merlin chapter 9. This is the second book in the series called The Seven Songs of Merlin. And in the last chapter, it was a pretty short one. Let's check what happened. And Washambhala told Merlin how to cure his mother Ellen because she had inhaled this shadow thing and it will kill her in a month painfully, and it's like a curse of Rita Gower. And he told him he has to go to the other world and meet Dagda. And so it's like hard to, to go to the other world. This is a book, Maka. Okay. Anyway, 9. Rosemary. Since my mother was already too weak to walk, Rhea and I made a rough-hewn stretcher by weaving some vines from the dune between my staff and the branch of a dead hawthorn tree. As we worked, threading the vines from one side to the other, I explained some of what I had learned from the shell, and asked her to lead us through the forest to our bassa. Yet even as I said the name of the great tree, I felt a strong sense of foreboding at the thought of returning there. I had no idea why. Rhea, by contrast, didn't seem concerned or surprised to learn that the writing on our bassa's walls held the secret I would need to find the other world well. Perhaps she had seen our bassa give so many answers to so many questions before. She merely nodded, continuing to tie off the vines. At last, we finished the stretcher and helped my mother slide into place. Laying my hand on her brow, I could tell that she had grown hotter. Yet despite her worsening condition, she did not knowingly complain. The same could not be said about Bumblebee. We had barely started walking, and with him taking the rear of the stretcher, when he began doing his own imitation of a speaking shell. When at last he realized that his audience did not find this amusing at all, he switched to describing the intricacies of his bell-laden hat as if it were some sort of royal crown. When that, too, failed, he began complaining that carrying such a heavy load might strain his delicate back, hampering his abilities as a jester. I didn't respond, although I was tempted to silence both him and his jangly bells by stuffing his hat into his mouth. Rhea led the way, with the flowering harp flung over her leafy shoulder. I took the front of the stretcher, but the weight of my own guilt seemed the heaviest burden of all. Even crossing the dune, passing beside the bell-shaped flower, felt like a strenuous march. Before entering Druma Wood, we passed through a verdant meadow. Ribbed with streams, the grasses of the meadow moved in waves like the surface of the sea. Every rivulet splashed and rippled, lining the plants along the banks with sparkling ribbons of water. I thought how full of beauty this spot might have seemed to me under different circumstances, beauty not caused by a magical instrument or a great wizard, beauty that was simply there. Finally, with a crackling of twigs and needles underfoot, we entered the ancient forest. The bright meadow disappeared, and all went dark. Powerful resins, sometimes pungent, sometimes sweet, spiced the air. Branches whispered and clacked overhead. Shadows seemed to drift silently behind the trees. Once again, I felt the eeriness of this forest. It was more than a collection of living beings of varied kinds. It was, in truth, a living being itself. Once it had given me my hemlock staff, but now I felt certain it was watching me, regarding me with suspicion. I stubbed my toe on a root. Though I winced in pain, I held tight to the stretcher. My second sight had grown stronger since I was last here, but the dim light still hampered my vision. Sunlight struck just the topmost layer of these dense groves, while only a few rare beams stretched all the way to the forest floor. Yet I was not about to slow down to get my bearings. I didn't have time, nor did my mother. Following Rhea, we pushed deeper into the forest, bearing the stretcher of vines. The strange sensation that the trees themselves were watching, following our every move, grew stronger with every step. The clacking branches sounded agitated as we passed beneath them. Other creatures seemed aware of us as well. Every so often I glimpsed a bushy tail or pair of yellow eyes. Squeals and howls often echoed among the darkening boughs. And once, from somewhere very near, I heard a loud, prolonged scraping sound. Maka. Like sharp claws ripping at a layer of bark or skin. My arms and shoulders ached, but hearing the swelling groans of my mother hurt more. Bumblebee at last seemed moved enough by her suffering to contain his grumbling, although his bells continued to jangle. And while Rhea moved through the woods with the lightness of a breeze, she often glanced back worriedly at the stretcher. After hours of marching through the dark glades draped with mosses and ferns, my shoulders throbbed as if they were about to burst. My hands, nearly numb, couldn't hold on any longer. Was there no shorter route? Was it possible that Rhea had lost her way? I cleared my dry throat, ready to call out to her. Then, up ahead, I glimpsed a new light in the branches. As we pushed through a tangle of ferns which clung to my ankles and thighs, the light grew stronger. The spaces between the trunks widened. A cool breeze, as fragrant as fresh mint, slapped the sweaty skin of my brow. We entered a grassy clearing. In the center, rising from a web of burly roots, stood a majestic oak tree, Arbassa. Older than old it looked, and taller than any other tree we had seen. Its massive trunk, as wide as 5 or 6 trees fused into one, lifted several times my height before its first branches emerged. From there it soared up, until at length it emerged with the clouds. Set in the midst of its lower branches, made from the limbs of the oak itself, sat Rhea's aerial cottage. Branches curled and twisted to form its walls, floor, and roof. Shimmering curtains of green leaves draped every window. I remembered first seeing this cottage at night, when it had been lit from within and glowed like an exploding star. Rhea lifted her arms like rising branches. Arbassa. The great tree quivered, raining dew on all of us. With a pang, I recalled my clumsy attempt to make the beech tree in the dark hills bend down to me. On that day, Rhea had called me a fool for trying such a thing. Whether or not she had been right, I knew, as I gently lowered my mother's stretcher onto the grass, that I had been far more of a fool on this day for trying something else. "Rosemary," said Ellen, her voice hoarse from moaning. She pointed at a shrub, decked with spiky spires, that was growing near the edge of the clearing. "Get me some of that, please." In a flash, Rhea plucked a sprig and offered it to her. "Here you are. It's so fragrant it reminds me of pine needles in the sun. What did you call it?" "Rosemary." My mother rolled it between her palms, filling the air with its striking scent. She brought the crushed leaves to her face and inhaled deeply. Her face relaxed a bit. She lowered her hands. "The Greeks called it starlight of the land. Isn't that lovely?" Rhea nodded, her curls bouncing on her shoulders. "And it's good for rheumatism, isn't it?" Ellen gazed at her in surprise. "How in the world did you know that?" "Quen, my friend, used it to help her hands." A shadow crossed Rhea's face. "At least she used to be my friend." "She made a pact with the goblins," I explained, "and almost killed us in the bargain. She was Rhea, what did you call her?" "A treeling. Half tree, half person. The very last one of her kind." Rhea listened for a moment to the whispering oak leaves above us. "She took care of me ever since I was a baby, after she found me abandoned in the forest." My mother winced in pain, though her eyes remained fixed on Rhea. Do you miss your real family, child?" Rhea waved her hand lightly. "Oh no, not at all. The trees are my family, especially Arbassa." Again the branches quivered, showering us with dew. And yet I couldn't help but notice that, despite Rhea's carefree words, her gray-blue eyes seemed sad. Sadder than I had ever seen them. Bumblebee, frowning with his eyebrows, mouth, and chins, bent down next to the stretcher and touched my mother's forehead. "You are hot," he said grimly. "Hotter than before." "This is just the occasion for my riddle about my bells. It's one of my funniest, especially since I don't know any others. Shall I tell it?" "No." I pushed him roughly aside. "Your riddles and songs will only make her feel worse." He pouted, all of his chins wobbling above the clasps of his cloak. "Too true, too true, too true." Then he drew himself up a little straighter. "But some day, mark my words, I will make somebody laugh." "You think so?" "Yes. It might even be you." "Right. And the day you do that, I'll eat my boots." I scowled at him. "Get away now. You're worse than a curse, a plague, and a typhoon combined." Ellen moaned, shifting her weight on the stretcher. She started to say something to Rhea, her blue eyes wide with anxiety. Then, for some reason, she caught herself. Instead, she took another sniff of rosemary. Turning to me, she asked, "Fetch some lemon balm, will you? It will help calm this headache. Do you know where any grows?" I'm not sure. Rhea might know. Rhea, her eyes still darkened, nodded. And some chamomile, child, if you can find it. It often sprouts near pine trees, alongside a little white mushroom with red hairs on the stem. The trees will guide me to it. Rhea glanced up at our boss's mighty boughs. But first we'll bring you inside. She peeled off her snug shoes, made from some kind of bark, and stepped into a small hollow in the roots. Then she spoke a long, swishing phrase in the language of an oak. The roots closed over her feet so that she stood like a young sapling at our boss's side. As she opened her arms to embrace the huge trunk, a leafy branch lowered and laid itself across her back. All at once the branch lifted, the roots parted, and the trunk creased and cracked open, revealing a small, bark-edged doorway. Rhea entered, beckoning us to follow. As I bent to pick up the front end of the stretcher, I looked at my mother. Perspiration flecked her cheeks and brow. Such torment in her face. Seeing her this way felt like a spear twisting in my chest, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that not all the pain she was feeling this day had been caused by me. Bumblebee, grumbling to himself, picked up the rear. Together, we stumbled across the maze of roots toward the doorway. When I was only 2 paces away, the bark-edged doors began to close, just as it had done before when I first came to our bassa. Once again, the tree did not want to let me inside. Rhea shrieked. She waved her hands, swishing a stern reprimand. The tree shuddered. The belligerent door stopped closing, then slowly opened again. Rhea shot me a glance, her expression grim. Then she turned and began to climb the gnarled, spiraling staircase within the trunk. As I followed, ducking my head to pass through the door, I was struck by the smells, rich and moist like autumn leaves after a rain, and by the sheer enormity of the trunk. Our bassa seemed even larger inside than she had outside. Even so, I had to concentrate hard in the dim light not to bump the stretcher against the walls or tilt it so far that my mother might slip off. Carefully, we climbed the stairs of living wood. Strange writing, as intricate as a spider's web, flowed across the wall. Its interwoven runes filled the entire stairwell from top to bottom, but it was as incomprehensible as before. My hopes sank further. Finally, we came to the thick curtain of leaves that marked the entry into Rhea's cottage. Pushing through, we stepped out onto a wide floor of woven boughs. All around us, wooden furniture sprouted straight out of the interlaced branches. I recognized the low table by the hearth, the pair of sturdy chairs, the honey-colored cabinet whose edges were lined with green leaves. "Oh," breathed Ellen, as she shifted slightly to see better. "It's so beautiful." I nodded to Bumblebee, and we set down the stretcher as gently as possible. Even as he straightened himself stiffly, his frowns lessened ever so slightly. He looked around, captivated by the interior of the cottage. My own thoughts, however, remained in the stairwell below. As if reading my mind, Rhea touched my arm. "I have some herbs to fetch for your mother." She removed the flowering harp from her shoulder, placing it against the wall near the stretcher. "And you, if you still hope to save her, have much work to do." Okay, well that was chapter 9. Join me tomorrow for chapter 10 called Our Boss's Secret. And I hope you guys enjoyed a cat cameo. Okay. Kitty, you gotta get off the mouse. Okay, we gotta stop streaming. Don't bite me. Okay. Bye.